something weird. Let's put it there. There we go. Hi, I'm Emily and I'm a 5 times finisher of the Lakeland 100. If you don't know already, because I say it in all my videos, and I'm probably going to say it for the rest of my life, to be honest. I am the proud owner of one of these. Have it on my person at all times, just, you know, for any eventuality, any conversation starter that is needed. Yes, I am milking the Lakeland 100 for all the content possible, but I don't care. I'm not sorry. I love it. It's my favourite race. That's why I've done it so many times. As a reminder, for those people that don't already know, the Lakeland 100 is a 105-mile single-stage ultramarathon that takes place in the Lake District every year. Single stage means it is a non-stop ultramarathon. There are checkpoints en route, but you don't stop and pack up and go to a hotel and then start again the next day. You are running from Coniston all the way around the Lake District back to Coniston. I've actually got the map up on the wall behind me. That is how much I love this race. It's actually part of our living room. In this video, I'm going to take you through my 5 Lakeland 100 finishes, what got me to the start line, how those races went, and what got me eventually to the finish line. The race on average has a 50% dropout rate, so half of the people that start this race on average will not finish. I'm aware that a lot of people take on the Lakeland 100 and possibly aren't as prepared as they want to be. But what I want to show you in this video is that actually you don't have to be your absolute fittest and fastest self to get around the Lakeland 100. So much of it has got to do with mental strength, your mental tenacity, your capability to deal with things on the day, and more than anything, I think just a bit of luck as well. So let's set the scene a little bit. In 2011, I met my now husband, and he had entered a race called the Lakeland 50. He hadn't even run a marathon at this point. I think he was entered into Brighton Marathon and did run it in the lead up to the Lakeland 50. He started the race with a couple of friends from our running club and very, very early on started to feel unwell, massively overheated, and had to unfortunately DNF. When he was feeling better, he rang me up from Coniston and said, do you know what, I'm really gutted that I didn't finish, but it is an incredible event and we absolutely have to come up next year and we'll do it again. Fast forward to 2012 and my husband and I take part in the Lakeland 50. It really, really ignited a love of ultramarathons in me, and I went on to complete it again the following year, and then I entered my first Lakeland 100 in 2015. So let's start with my first Lakeland 100. In 2015, I was 27 years old and I had already run a 100-mile race before that. I'd done the North Downs Way 100, which runs very, very close to us here in Kent. So I had a lot of support to get me round my first 100-mile finish. So I went into the Lakeland 100 knowing that I could run 100 miles, but not necessarily knowing that I could do it in the Lake District. I asked Mimi Anderson, who is a fantastic, incredibly experienced ultramarathon runner, to coach me for my first attempt, and she got me in incredible condition. I was probably the fittest and fastest I'd ever been. I was super, super fit, really ready to take on my first Lakeland 100. I started the race on the Friday evening, really, really excited to get going. That first 50k of the Lakeland 100 is so undulating, so technical, I think people would call it. It's so, so rocky. You go up some really high climbs in the middle of the night, and it really kind of humbled me. As I literally entered the Dalmain estate, the 50 runners were on their first 4-mile loop of the estate, and they all ran past me just as I got into the checkpoint. And I think by the time I got out of the Dalmain checkpoint, I was just at the back with a couple of the back markers on the 50-mile race. So for those people that don't know, the 50 runs on the second half of the 100-mile race. What I have learned along the way is that if you get into Dalmain as the 50 runners are starting, or before the 50 runners have even started, then you're on for a fantastic finish. That being said, in this first year, I did get in there after the 50 had started, and I did still finish. It was a really, really tough slog this first year, and bearing in mind, like I said, I was the fittest and fastest that I'd ever been. I was only 27. I did find it really, really tough, and I think mentally the hardest part for me was the lack of sleep. When I got into the Kentmere checkpoint, I actually asked the marshal if I could have a lay down. I remember someone wrapping me up in what I think was an old curtain, laying on a bench and having about 10 minutes of sleep, and that did really, really help me. But I remember I got into Chapel Style and realised that I really didn't have long to get to the finish line. Luckily, in the Chapel Style checkpoint, I met a guy called Mike who stayed with me all the way to the finish, and he was brilliant at figuring out exactly how many minutes we had left to do however many miles. I am crap at doing maths in an ultramarathon. I really need someone to spell it out to me. Mike was brilliant, and we did get back into Coniston just in time, and I finished in 39 hours and 26 minutes. This was my very first Lakeland 100 medal. Now, in every good story, there is always a really good subplot. And the subplot to my Lakeland 100 story is that my granddad, who in 2015, when I ran my first Lakeland 100, was in his early 80s. He had already been to see me finish the North Downs Way 100, which was my first 100-mile race, and he really wanted to come and see me finish this one. He'd recently bought a fully electric car, and when was this? This was like 9 or 10 years ago. Electric cars at that point weren't as good as they are now. His car could only do 90 miles before it needed charging. He was determined to drive from Kent all the way up to the Lake District in his electric car to see me race. Luckily, my mum had offered to come with him and help him make the journey. Unfortunately for her, she ended up doing most of the driving. They had to stop, I think, about 4 or 5 times to charge the car on the way up. It took them about 17 hours to drive from Kent all the way up to Coniston. They did get there in time for me to finish, but basically they just turned around and then drove all the way back home. Let's have a bit of tea. 2017. In 2017, I had really big ambitions for my running, and one of those was to go back and do the Lakeland 100 again and just prove to myself that it wasn't a fluke when I got around the first time. I had taken part in the Grand Union Canal race, I think a couple months before the Lakeland 100. The Grand Union Canal race is a 145-mile race, which is much, much flatter along the Grand Union Canal from Birmingham to London. And I had done that, and I was really happy that I'd done it, but I'd also picked up a bit of a knee injury in the process. So in the run up to the Lakeland 100 that year, I had far less training under my belt, but I did have the mental confidence that I'd done it once and hopefully I could do it again. That year, I think I got round to Dalmain really quite happily, although my knee was quite uncomfortable. I got through Dalmain, out to Howtown, and then climbed up Fusedale. And on the descent from Fusedale, my feet were just feeling really, really sore, really wet. I think it had been quite a wet year that year. And I got to the bottom, sat on a rock on the sides of Haweswater and had a really big cry to myself. I took my shoes and socks off, put some dry socks on, which really cheered me up, and then carried on all the way around to Mardale Head. And I think by the time I got to Mardale Head, I felt a lot better. I remember having another nap in Kentmere, but mainly just because that's what I'd done the year before. So I thought I'll do it again and hopefully it will help. It did really help, and I finished the Lakeland 100 that year in a much quicker time of 36 hours and 47 minutes, which is about 2.5 hours quicker than my previous time. This was the finish medal that year. Can you see? There we are. The subplot, did Grandad come? Of course he did. He came up with my uncle and stayed for the weekend in some accommodation that we'd booked, and he was there at the finish to see me in. In 2018, we didn't actually run the Lakeland 100. I had just given birth to our first son, and my husband went up to run the 50, but I stayed at home. I remember sitting on the sofa, I think, tracking him in the middle of the night while I was feeding our son and feeling pretty gutted that I'd missed out on it that year. So 2019 was going to be my comeback year, coming back from having a baby, and coming back really to do it for myself, to prove to myself that just because I'd had a child, I could come back and still run 100 miles again. I did a lot of buggy running that year. We bought a brilliant running buggy, and I did kind of 80% of my running mileage with our son in the buggy. I also had a lot of help from friends and family in babysitting him so that I could get out for my longer runs. So I went into the Lakeland 100 feeling really happy, feeling really confident, and really motivated to finish for myself and for our son. My husband was also taking part in the Lakeland 100 in 2019, so there was even more reason for us both to finish, and I really felt like everyone was willing us on to both get around that year. The first half of the race, I felt really good. I felt like I was ahead of time. Blacksail Pass, actually, I think this is the year that became a good marker for me. So when I get to the top of Blacksail Pass and I'm running the Lakeland 100, if I look at my watch and it's around midnight or before, then I know I'm doing really well. And equally, if I get into Braithwaite and it's dark, normally that means, yes, you're doing really well. I remember getting all the way around to Dalmain, seeing our son and feeling really, really motivated to finish, really confident that I could get round. I remember leaving Dalmain and heading out to Pooley Bridge, and the heavens opened, and we just got absolutely soaked. As I climbed the road out of Pooley Bridge, I remember the ball of my foot feeling really, really sore. I stopped and sat on a bench and looked at it, and there was a huge blister on the ball of my foot. I was in so much pain. I remember ringing my mum and saying, don't leave Dalmain, come to Pooley Bridge because I think I'm going to drop out and you might have to just pick me up now. After I hung up the call, I remember standing up and standing on the ball of my foot and the blister popping. And suddenly it didn't hurt anymore, and I thought, do you know what, maybe I'll carry on. I got all the way to Howtown, went into the Howtown checkpoint, thought, right, I'm just going to put some fresh socks on. Looked at my feet and they looked awful. It was like I had trench foot. I said to one of the volunteers, oh my God, look at my feet. Like, have you ever seen feet as bad as this? And he was like, yes, every 100 runner is coming in with wet and macerated feet. Just put your shoes and socks back on and fucking get out. That pep talk was really all I needed, and it was just a reminder that actually we're all in the same boat, we were all in it together, and I did end up finishing the race that year. But that again was another moment where I thought my race was over and I very, very nearly stopped. I finished the race in 34 hours and 44 minutes that year, which was 2 hours quicker than my previous time. I was really, really chuffed, and obviously my granddad was there waiting for me in Coniston, and it was really lovely to go in the tent holding my son and with all my family and friends there waiting for me. My next edition of the Lakeland 100 was in 2021. Obviously in 2020, we had a global pandemic. We also had a child in the first COVID lockdown. And that meant that I, again, wanted to target the 2021 race as a bit of a comeback race for me as a mum. But obviously because we were in a pandemic, it was really, really hard to train for this one. It was probably the toughest ever training block getting up to this Lakeland 100. I call it a training block. It was basically just me trying to get up every day, look after my children, keep them alive, with little to no help around other than myself and my husband. Our children were 1 and 3 years old. I think I was still breastfeeding. So it was going to be a really, really tricky year for us just logistically. Luckily, some friends of ours allowed us to stay with them in their house near the Lake District. So we weren't too far away, and my husband could stay there with the kids while I went off and ran the race. 2021 was a really, really hot year for the Lakeland 100. I remember, I think the course record was set that year. It was a really blistering hot race, and a lot of the streams that normally run across the course were bone dry. I remember my feet being bone dry for the first time, not having to change my socks that often. I remember starting, feeling really strong, really confident, remembering this was my 4th go at the Lakeland 100. I'd got 3 finishes, a pandemic and 2 children under my belt, and feeling really, really confident that whatever happened, I could finish this year. Getting to Blacksail Pass on the Friday evening and getting to the top of Blacksail Pass again around midnight, feeling like, yep, I'm doing okay, this is going well. Turning around and seeing the most amazing full moon and all of the lights trailing back behind me to Wasdale. As ever, something always throws a spanner in the works. I remember this year I had a problem with my right hip flexor, and I remember getting into Dalmain and thinking, is this it? Have I got to stop? Again, I always have a point where something comes up and I think, well, this is it, this is my race over. I do remember leaving Dalmain, carrying on with a couple of friends that I'd made on the route that year, and getting to Fusedale and having to literally lift my leg off the ground for every step going up Fusedale. Getting into the Chapel Style checkpoint that year and seeing a lovely volunteer called Angela. I lay down on a blow-up bed. She tucked me in and said, I'll wake you up in 15 minutes. She woke me up, took the duvet off me and was like, do you know what? I'll give you 5 more minutes. And she tucked me back in. And I always say thank you to Angela for that little nap, because it's definitely what got me to the finish. And I finished that year in a slower time of 37 hours and 47 minutes. This was the lovely shiny medal for the 2021 race. Did Grandad come up? No, he did not come up to the Lakeland 100 that year. We actually told him a porky pie and said that we were only going on holiday. Unfortunately, just logistically, it was impossible for us to get Grandad up there that year, but we were still thinking of him when I crossed the finish line. The kids were there though, and they did manage to finish the Lakeland 1 with my husband, which was really special for them. 2022. So in 2022, I was obviously aiming for my 5th Lakeland 100 finish. I had my eyes on the prize. I really wanted to get this slate. I really wanted to finish. And that is why I asked a coach to help me. I asked Gary House to help get me ready for the Lakeland 100. I really felt like I could get potentially a PB this year. I really wanted to go as hard as I could. Gary built in so many great hill sessions into my plan. I think my legs were really prepared for the lakes. That being said, I'm still mum to 2 children. There was still definitely weeks where I couldn't get out, or the kids were sick, or I was sick. And I think I still averaged only about 40 to 45 miles a week in the real peak weeks leading up to this race. Luckily for me, I also had about 12 or 13 other members from our running club coming up to do the Lakeland 50 or Lakeland 100 that year. So it was a really special year. There was a big group of us going, and I was just so determined to get around that route and to get my slate. The weather that year was really quite mixed. I think on the Friday evening when we started the 100, it was quite dry and really quite kind of muggy. And then into the Friday night and into Saturday, it started to rain, and I don't think it stopped. I kept in mind all of those markers that I've got in my head for on the route. So I got to Blacksail Pass and it was before midnight, so I was really happy about that. I got into Braithwaite and it was still dark, and I think I got in there at the earliest possible time I've ever got in. And actually going out on the old coach road, which normally I find really hard and such a long, arduous slog, I was running along 11-minute miling, which for me at that point is just unheard of. Through into the Langdale Valley, I remember I had another nap in this checkpoint, and it's at this point that my head torch decided to stop. I had spare batteries, I even had a spare head torch, but neither of them wanted to work. And luckily I bumped into another runner called Stephen, who lent me his head torch as we went out of the chapel style checkpoint. He wasn't really sure of the route from this point to the finish, so we stuck together and I showed him which way we had to go until we got over Tilberthwaite, down the other side, and we ended up running in and finishing together, which was really nice. I finished in 34 hours and 36 minutes, so just a few minutes quicker than my previous time, but I was really happy to pick up this lovely shiny medal. I did get to sit in the VIP area at the race presentation and pick up my lovely slate, something that I am still so proud of even a couple of years later, and yeah, will probably never stop going on about. Story in the subplot is that unfortunately that year Grandad couldn't come up and see me finish. I remember sharing a cup of tea with him and talking all about it when we got home. I hope that going through my 5 finishes, hopefully it wasn't too boring, but really what I wanted to do was show you that you don't have to be your absolute fittest and fastest to get around the Lakeland 100. Across my 5 finishes, I've been super duper fit. I've also been super duper unfit and underprepared. But I think over the 5 years, I've obviously grown in confidence of my ability to finish. And I've also had a lot of lucky situations where people have just been there beside me and helped me finish. The Lakeland 100 for me has been a real dream race of mine, and that's probably why I've done it so many times and why I continue to go on about it. It's punctuated our life for the last 12 years. Between getting married, having kids, going through a global pandemic, it has really been there as a goal for me to aim for each July, and I love encouraging other people to have a go at the 50 and maybe have a go at the 100 too. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I promise soon I will stop talking about it.